Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the London Affiliate Conference 2012. Very happy to have everyone here. And today we are going to talk about an overview of the upcoming changes in legislation in the UK regarding licensing and taxation. To my left, we have Peter Wilson. He is an expert in UK gaming law and, of course, a solicitor here in the UK. To my right is Steve Donahue, who is a gambling consultant, and he has 12 or 15 years in the gaming industry? 15 years in the iGaming industry. One of the first men I met when I came into this industry. He was a boy just then. So we're going to start with Steve giving us a little bit of an overview of how we got to where we are. And then Peter's going to say what the consequences are when we do have some changes in UK gaming licensing and taxation regulation. Steve.
Thank you. Right, I'm Steve Donahue. I'm a management consultant. I've been doing this since 1995. In those days, doing speeches about online gambling were a lot easier. You just said, don't make the sites too busy. People have very slow download speeds and everything like that. But I'm mostly today to speak to you about politics. I am the Secretariat to the Parliamentary All-Party Betting and Gaming Group, which is a group of 40 MPs and peers who are interested in the gambling industry. I have to say there are over 2,000 parliamentarians. It would be nice if we had more than about 40 who were interested in gambling. And currently I'm Special Advisor to the Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee Inquiry on Gambling, which is currently looking at the impact of the Gambling Act 2005. Which obviously has been interesting. We're currently report writing. I'm not going to comment on that because obviously I can't, and I have to make a very big disclaimer that everything I'm about to say is my own personal view and absolutely nothing to do with these guys. Because basically, I believe why we are here, why we are having a change in the law, is because there's been a massive fuck-up. Excuse my French. There are the 4 ins, I call it. Incompetence, intransigence, infighting, and intolerance. And I'll go through this. Basically, a quick history lesson. And I have to admit, I've done this mostly for me, not for you. And I'm not going to go through everything. But basically, what we can see, 1993, first signs of the internet, 1996, 1997 is when people start realizing the internet was an issue and people were going offshore. The gaming board starts saying there is an internet problem. I was part of a conference with the Home Office who regulated gambling at that point, and we were saying the internet will mess everything up. Internet gambling regulation at that time mentioned clockwork machinery. That was the level of technology the legislation was built for. Basically, what I'm trying to show here is that the whole world jumped onto the internet gambling bandwagon with regulation as well, but the British government took a bloody long time. And what that meant was we've got Alderney, we've got Malta, which I think is on the next page. They're setting up as offshore jurisdictions, and the British government is taking its time. One of the key points, which I think is quite ironic, is that we had, when we finally decided we were going to change the law in the UK, we had something called the Budd Review, named after Sir Alan Budd. And what a lot of people don't realise is that the concept of national licensing, arguably, was first thought of by Sir Alan Budd. He actually puts in the review that if you're going to do internet gambling with UK customers, you should be a registered British company, you should be located in, or have your servers in the UK, and you should have a .co.uk address. This there in black and white, unfortunately, government ignores it. The stated reason was that they didn't know what to do with third-party servers. If you, at those days, it was microgaming, now Playtech, you know, if they were hosting your sites, quite frankly, how did you do how would you regulate them? I would have said, this is not the most difficult thing in the world to work out, especially as places like the Isle of Man and Alderney were already handling this kind of issue. Actually, at the Select Committee, we had the Minister and the Secretary of State at the time, Richard Cabourn and Tessa Jowell, and the implication they gave was, well, we were kind of running out of time on writing the law, and this was kind of the best we could put together. Kind of gives you an implication about why we are where we are. Just a key point. The draft bill does not prevent British consumers from gambling with offshore operators, but it would be surprising if they felt the need to do so once the new regime is in place. The government's firm belief is that this newest sector of the British gambling industry can establish itself as a world leader. There was an idea in the British government that the way we would get round the offshore jurisdictions was Britain would have a kite mark and that the customer would give a damn and that they would come to British registered sites because there would, I mean, I actually remember discussions of what the kite mark should look like. This was obviously pie in the sky. I think we all know customers just cared they get paid out, not really where the place is located. So there's not a lot of thinking going on, and that's why I call it incompetence. I have to say, we still don't even have a bill going through Parliament yet. We've got Malta as the first EU state. This is why I call it intransigence. Basically, DCMS, not enough brains, not enough people, plus too much listening to key stakeholders. I will come back to the idea of key stakeholders. Key stakeholders, for you, those of you who don't know, are the Daily Mail, a reactionary newspaper which supposedly is the voice of Middle England. Middle England is supposedly the swing voters and therefore provides you with your route to power. So if you do what they say, you will arguably get voters. At this point, the Daily Mail hadn't jumped on board that they would do a major job in attacking the government for bringing in gambling deregulation. So we then have, because the gambling bill became probably the most over-consulted piece of legislation in recent parliamentary history. The fact that it's such a piece of crap now makes you wonder whether there is such thing as too much consultation. As we can see, we have a recommendation 115. The pre-legislative scrutiny committee, which was a group of MPs and Lords set up to scrutinise the bill before it hit legislation, had realised that we were taking years and years to deal with internet gambling. And that while this was going on, the intransigence, Alderney, the Isle of Man, now Malta, all our British operators going offshore, a whole offshore industry growing before our eyes, and actually the dream which had been sold, because what people forget, because it was overtaken by the idea of super casinos, was the original idea behind changing the Gambling Act, or the laws which we had, was there is an opportunity to make Britain the centre for online gambling. We were going to be the first what do you want to call it, mainland first world jurisdiction. Why? Taxes and jobs, and good jobs. Think about all the thousands of jobs in the online gambling industry. They could have been in London. Anyway, we get to 2005. The Gambling Act is in. Internet gambling has been going for 10 years before the Act gets royal assent. Doesn't mean it's operational. Gambling Commission takes over. 2007. Intolerance. Why intolerance? Because at that time, Chancellor of the Exchequer was one Mr. Gordon Brown. Gordon Brown, who subsequently became not one of our better prime ministers, a son of a manse. And for those of you, which I'm hoping is the majority, who don't know what that means, a manse is a house in Scotland where a preacher lives. And Gordon's dad was a preacher. Gordon didn't like gambling. He didn't only like gambling for religious reasons, he didn't like gambling for socialist reasons. Old Labour has socialist roots, would say Old Labour is socialist. Socialism is very close to Methodism and has always had an issue with gambling. It's also had an issue of anti-alcohol. Basically, anything the working class enjoyed doing, Old Labour didn't like. The fourth in is infighting. Because at this period of time, we're seeing the transition between Blair, who had been Prime Minister, to Brown. Blair and Brown's relationship, as you may or may not know, was going in the toilet. This, my belief is, was where Brown started flexing his muscles, because there were some on the left who thought that the Gambling Act epitomises everything which was wrong with New Labour and Blairism, allowing the liberalisation of gambling. The working classes would ruin themselves in casinos and online, and it was Blair's fault. So, what did Gordon Brown do? He set it at 15%, our remote gambling tax. Now, the theory is, well, that's what the offline gambling tax rate was, so it would be unfair to put it at another rate. But everyone knows, everyone knew, that if you put it at that rate, you effectively killed the British online industry. And that's exactly what happened. Caborn and Jowl at the Select Committee gave the impression that Her Majesty's Treasury were not overly convinced that the UK should have an online gambling industry. My argument would be that the Treasury is always convinced of new industries in high-tech jobs. But if the boss of the Treasury says, we don't like gambling, the Treasury is not liking gambling. So, what we end up with, as you know, is the whitelist. Sorry, just to remind you, I'm giving you a history to tell you why we are moving to a national licensing system. The reason we're moving to a national licensing system is because the whitelist got messed up. It got messed up because Antigua got on the whitelist. Now, I have to say, because I do have a lawyer with me, these are just rumours. Why did Antigua get on the whitelist? The rumours are that there was a close relationship between the regulators. The rumours are that there was a World Trade Organization deal. Antigua was taking the US to the WTO about the US having a pop at some of the Antiguan licensees, and the deal was if they went on our whitelist, then they would drop that. I did a Freedom of Information Act up to the Gambling Commission. The Gambling Commission did not investigate Antigua when they put their application through. Not that they didn't just investigate Antigua, they didn't investigate anyone. Theoretically, it is actually the Department of Culture, Media and Sport who approves jurisdictions on the whitelist. This is done with advice from the Gambling Commission. I put it to you that it was an element of tick box or check box regulation. I've also been told there is an element that the regulations for how you get on the whitelist, once known, are so easy to fudge, they couldn't actually say no. But what this meant was we actually had two meetings in Parliament. There was a meeting in Westminster Hall, and then there was a delegated legislation select committee meeting where various MPs went absolutely ape about Antigua being added to the whitelist. I would ask you to go and look at Hansard, where there are comments like, I don't know anything about online gambling, but I know Antigua is corrupt. Who is guarding the guard? You know, who is looking after the Gambling Commission? Basically, there was uproar. The minister of the time, Jerry Sutcliffe, lovely lad, did the only thing he could do. And that was he brought the shutters down on the whitelist. There was going to be no more applications. Slight aside, there is a thought this is legally dubious because there's actually nothing in the regulations about closing the whitelist. But we have and still have a situation whereby the whitelist is closed and we have new jurisdictions like Jersey, which has got a AAA rating for its Jersey's got some pretty good regulation. They can't get on the whitelist because of one of the inns, intransigence, arguably incompetence, Jersey's suffering. So, where do we go to from here? After, but I've gone ahead of myself, terribly sorry there. We get public consultation. Oddly enough, April 2009 is when they closed the whitelist. It's January 2010 before we get the start of anything, and that's the idea we're going to have a public consultation. Now, as you guys know, being in the internet industry, time moves fast. Not in government. So we're at March, public consultation starts. Government starts to say the reasons why we need to change the law. Oddly enough, those operators licensed in the Isle of Man, Alderney, Malta, suddenly you're not getting any consumer protection. Although that when we set up the whitelist, that was kind of what we said you were getting. Seems to be a change of mind. No suspicious betting activity reporting. Well, actually, if you speak to the regulators, they talk to each other and a lot of this goes on. No contribution to gambling research, education and treatment. A valid point, but actually a lot of operators who are based offshore do donate to the various charities. So it's basically, it's all a bit bullshit, if you'll excuse the technical description. Basically, we're going back to national licensing because actually to keep the whitelist would actually mean to admit that they'd messed up. And you can't admit that you've messed up. So we go back to national licensing. And where we are, July, ministerial statement, we're going to have national licensing. Probably the key thing, the Economic Secretary to the Treasury. I think everyone realises that this is about revenue raising. Because quite frankly, everyone realises if you take Antigua off the whitelist, those who were on the whitelist gave bloody good regulation. So there was consumer protection, there was everything you needed. The whitelist worked until DCMS stroke Gambling Commission messed up. And now we're moving to national licensing at a time when the country is basically bankrupt, and there is a view we're going to get a whole load of tax revenue from that. That, I fear, may not be the case. May not be the case because I'm wondering just how many people are going to bother, because there is going to be no enforcement. So why would you get a license in the UK if you don't have to? Well, you do legally, but they won't. Anyway, Peter will talk about that. Opposition. There's obviously opposition from the offshore jurisdictions. This is a serious blow to their business models. It's not a fatal blow. Offshore jurisdictions all offer far more than just come to us, we're low tax and you can target the UK. The offshore jurisdictions will adapt, grow, because that's what they've done so far. I don't think the second point I've already made. The reasons basically are rubbish. Peter will pick up on the fact that there could be legal challenge. A very big point made is that our Gambling Commission, when the law comes through, will have to look after probably 400 licenses. They have shown so far very little evidence of their ability to do this, and we should expect it to go a bit, yeah, I don't think. So, the only question most people want is what's the tax rate? What's the tax rate going to be? I have to say, no one knows. So, just finishing off, when and if. Right, the way, if you don't know, legislation in the UK works, you're a department, you want a bill, you have to get in the Queen's Speech. The Queen's Speech is in May. DCMS have tried. DCMS is the smallest department. It gets one bite of the cherry. That bite of the cherry is this year. If it doesn't get in this year, next year the rumour is there will be a big telecoms bill they'll be going for, and the year after is election year, so they ain't going to do it. So basically, if it's going to happen, it's got to be in the Queen's Speech this May. There are issues as well, because there's probably going to be a ministerial reshuffle. Our current gambling minister is considered okay, but not fabulous. His colleague, the sports minister, is considered disastrous, and his boss, the Secretary of State, is considered very ambitious. So we could have a complete change. When you get complete changes, you can get completely different agendas. So you have to factor that in. Olympics. We have the, had you noticed we're having the Olympics? Have you noticed we're spending billions and billions of pounds on people running around a track? Anyway, if it goes wrong, that could change everything, because that will give a very bad reputation on DCMS. And that could link into DCMS being disbanded. There have been rumours about DCMS getting disbanded, are bouncing around the place. The argument being that DCMS was set up to do licensing, gambling licensing, and then the Olympics. And all of this has been done. And actually, you don't need a big department to do it, especially with a lot of the art stuff has been cut due to funding. DCMS goes, then it's a question of where gambling goes. Gambling could go to business. If it goes to business, arguably, A, they're going to be very interventionist, or B, we're just going to be a small blot on a much bigger picture. Or we could go back to the Home Office. Home Office is purely regulatory. We would just be left alone. We don't know. The key thing is what the Treasury think. The Treasury pull all the strings, oddly enough. They're going to be working out how much tax they can charge, and whether that amount of tax and the amount of people who come over will make it worthwhile. I personally, and what I'm hearing, is that is still unknown. There is still an opportunity to kick this into the long grass. People who don't want national licensing in the UK should start lobbying and pointing out issues like, why the hell should I get a license if I don't want to? How are you going to set a tax rate which makes you comparable with Malta or Alderney or Gibraltar? Because it's not just obviously about the remote gambling tax, it's about corporation tax and VAT and all the other things, which makes the tax rate in the UK huge compared to other jurisdictions. And that is basically all I have to say. And I'm going to hand over now to Peter. Thank you very much.
Ooh. Good morning. Good morning. Okay, well, I have about 10 minutes. So I'm going to simplify my first bit, which is the changes to remote licensing, and because I want to talk about something else as well. I want to talk about extradition threats, because this is my lawyer stands up and scares the life out of everyone bit, because there's been some developments which you may or may not be aware of, and I just want to draw a little analogy with what's been happening in the extradition front. So first of all, key legal changes. There's only two, so this will be short and simple. All we need to do, and I am simplifying this, but broadly speaking, all we need to do is make two changes to the Gambling Act. Because the whole of gambling legislation is offence-based, that you commit an offence unless you get a licence, and that's common in many countries. All we need to do is say the offence of providing unlicensed facilities for remote gambling, although it currently applies, as I'm sure many of you know, if you have your RNG or similar piece of remote gambling equipment in Britain, then you need a licence here, an operating licence here. So I'm talking about operators, not affiliates, just for the present, and then I'll move on to affiliates. So all we need to do is we need to change that simply and say, if you transact with a person in Britain, even if you have no remote gambling equipment here, you need a licence. So the new regime, when it comes in, and it will come in, we've established that, just a matter of timing, will be you either have a UK licence, then you can do business with British people, or you don't have a UK licence, and if you enter into a gambling contract with somebody here, you commit a criminal offence. That's what the change will be. So the second aspect will be advertising, and it will be, at the moment, as you know, the people that can advertise here are those that are regulated in the European Economic Area, which is the 27 EU member states, Norway, Liechtenstein and Iceland, Gibraltar, or one of the whitelisted places. And again, very simple change there. You change that to an offence of advertising non-UK licensed remote gambling wherever you're regulated. So anywhere in the world you are, if you have a UK licence, you can advertise here. Now, why am I saying GB instead of UK? That you'll see that quite a lot in gambling legislation, and it is very confusing, is because Northern Ireland has a very old system, and so I hope that the government will take the opportunity to tidy that up, because Britain is England, Wales, Scotland, UK is England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and that's why you'll always see references to Britain, Great Britain and so on, rather than the UK. So that's all we need, is we need those two simple changes, and all of those currently licensed in the EEA, so say in France, Italy, Spain, as they will be, Denmark, some are already, and then you've got one now sports betting licence in Poland, you have more, and as we get more licensed in the EEA, they will automatically be eligible for the new UK licence, as will those in the whitelist jurisdictions, which puts Jersey, again, as Steve said, in a difficult position because they're not on the whitelist. And the whitelist will go, of course. Now, so they're the key legal changes. Now, the tax could actually accelerate the very thing that these changes are meant to stop. The whole point was, as Steve outlined in the history, we were going to be the world centre for remote gambling, and that completely fell flat on its face. And so if you can't encourage people to come here, maybe you can force them to come here by forcing them to get UK licenses. Well, actually, what I've tried to illustrate here is just imagine two scenarios. Say I'm a UK licensed operator, GB licensed operator, okay? Where every gambling service I offer, all my worldwide revenue is subject to corporation tax, about 28%, and remote gambling duty, 15%. Okay, so everything I get in from any punters anywhere in the world is subject to those taxes. Now, let's say Steve is in, let's pick Isle of Man, where there's, if my memory serves me correct, 0 corporation tax, very low duty. And Steve has to get one of these new licenses. Yes, he's got a burden, he's got to pay tax, but only on his UK custom. So all his custom from France, Italy, Spain, Estonia, Lithuania, you name it, he doesn't pay UK tax on. So he's still in a better position. He's still in a better position. So I'm going to look at Steve and I'm going to say, actually, why am I staying in the UK? There's still a huge advantage to go abroad. So the new system, instead of forcing people to come to the UK, in my view, will accelerate the departure of the remaining few. Okay? And obtaining a UK licence could be a real problem, because generally speaking, if I go to the Isle of Man or I go to Alderney, I'll get an e-gaming licence. Under my e-gaming licence, I can do poker, sportsbook, casino, I can do whatever I like. And I just agree the things I'm going to do with the regulator, and away I go. And in Malta, as we know, there's 4 classes of licence depending on your business structure, but in the UK, or GB as I put it there, we have all of those different types of remote gambling licence. So if I'm coming from, say I'm in the Isle of Man at the moment, I've got an e-gaming licence, and I have a sports book and I have bingo, casino, right? That's a typical mix. To come to the UK, I've got to get a betting real events, a betting virtual events, a bingo, a casino, and a gambling software. And then I've got to license up all my directors, IT director, marketing director, finance director, managing director, with personal management licenses. And that means I pay multiple fees. Multiple fees. These are only the application fees. This is the range depending on your turnover. Okay, you don't need to take into account those figures. The only point I'm trying to make is, instead of paying one license fee, which is a reasonable license fee, I'm going to pay multiple fees, multiple annual fees, and then there's all the multiple administration to go along with those, and multiple reporting and so on. So it's quite horrific. And then you've got to work out which license you need. Now, this is just one of the tests used by the Gambling Commission. This is to test whether, is my product remote betting or remote gaming? And so you have your e-gaming license. You don't care what it is. Doesn't matter what it is, because it's all licensed. But when you come to the UK, and you've got to then fracture that into every single product. And as we know, things are very confused when you offer something on the web, because what you take from a land-based activity and you offer it graphically can be very different. I mean, Keno, bingo, are those lotteries? Are they run as lotteries? Are they run as games? And it's a very difficult thing to try and then pigeonhole things that you didn't have to pigeonhole before. Unless, of course, the British government says, well, we won't worry about that. We just have a kind of Isle of Man type or Alderney type e-gaming licence, so like an overseas version. Well, then you've got the first possible legal challenge, because then that's terribly unfair on those people that are paying all the multiple licence fees and having all the multiple licences based here. So why wouldn't they go and get one of these simple overseas licences? Now, do the changes matter to affiliates? Because we're at the affiliate conference, and so that's what we care about most. And I say possibly not, because at the moment we've got very, very wide rules on advertising foreign gambling, and I'm sure you know, if you have links on your affiliate website to gambling that's taking place outside the EEA and outside the whitelist, then you are technically committing a criminal offence. because the criminal offence of advertising foreign gambling is so widely drawn that it applies to almost every English language website. But there have been no prosecutions. And that's because when you have a law that is so wide, it almost becomes inapplicable, or unenforceable, I should say. And there is no direct licensing of affiliates in the 2005 Gambling Act, and as far as I'm aware, Steve, there are no plans and no discussion about licensing or regulating affiliates as a particular category.
I think you'd have to explain what affiliates were.
Yes, you're right. You would have to explain what affiliates are, first of all. We all know what affiliates are. I've been coming to these conferences for many years, but still some of my colleagues in the industry don't know what affiliates are. That's their problem. So the government has rejected the use of ISP and financial transaction blocking, which is a curious thing to do when you introduce a new law. You're saying this is a new law, but actually we don't think we can enforce it. So do the changes matter? Well, possibly yes, because we do have the Advertising Standards Agency Codes of Practice, and my good friends Paddy Power, who like to run very interesting adverts, very successful adverts, and sometimes close to the edge. Sometimes they go a little bit over, but generally speaking, you know, that's the sort of advertising which is exciting and interesting, and lots of people admire that. So, but they always have to keep an eye on the codes of practice. And one of the codes of practice in the licence conditions and codes of practice for gambling licensees in the UK is that if their affiliates do not behave with their advertising and marketing, they should be severed. Now, you may say, well, so what? Well, the problem is that if we have a national licensing system come in, or when we have it come in, one must assume that the same rules will apply to those new licensees, be it in Germany, France, Italy, wherever, as apply to the UK licensees now. And that means they will all have to have a similar condition, a similar code of practice, which means they will all have to pay more attention to what you chaps are doing. So I think that is worth bearing in mind, you know. So a national licensing scheme could impact on affiliates, and of course, even if the government doesn't have ISP blocking and all of these tools which are all capable of being avoided, what they will do is that they will have memoranda of understanding with other regulators, the former whitelist regulators, the regulators in France, Italy and so on, and they will put pressure on them to put pressure on their operators. So there is a means informally to get enforcement. How am I doing? Have I run over now? I've run over.
You've got a few more minutes.
All right, okay. I'm just going to whiz on this last one. Okay, don't need those. Extradition threats. You will know, because you're all up on things, that these guys are all facing extradition to the US, okay? Kim Schmitz is the odd one out because he's in New Zealand. The others are all in the UK facing extradition. The case that interests me, for our purposes, is Richard O'Dwyer. And if anyone doesn't know, he started a well, just bear this in mind. Now think of an analogy as I describe this. Here is a guy who starts a website. This is a portal, an information marketing website. On his website, he has links. And these links are to other websites that offer pirated copyright material, TV shows, films, and so on, okay? US government says, those websites you're linking to are breaking US law. He doesn't have any pirated material on his site. He's a mere portal, okay? He doesn't share revenue. He gets revenue from separate advertising. Now, let's say those websites he's linking to don't have pirated content. Let's say they have, excuse me, gambling. Let's say they have gambling which breaches US laws. Isn't he analogous to an affiliate? Okay, let's not say about gambling. Let's say they have sports results, which is, according to those owners of that data, pirated content. In the gambling world, there are sports books which may use affiliates who do not have the rights to offer the sporting results, live results and so on. So all I'm saying is, not to frighten you too much, is keep that in mind. Keep an eye on that case. As his mother said, if they can come for Richard, they can come for anyone. Because he didn't have any presence in the US. Apparently his only connection with the US is his .com, routed through VeriSign in Virginia. And just 20 seconds on this. What's the problem with the extraditions to the US? There's no need to prove a prima facie case to extradite from the UK to the US. You don't need to provide the evidence if you're a US prosecutor. We do if we want somebody from the US, but they don't. And compared to penalties, Computer Misuse Act. Gary McKinnon would face a maximum of 2 years in prison here. Nobody's ever been in prison for the maximum under the Computer Misuse Act for hacking, as far as I'm aware. In the US, he could face decades in prison. And Mr. Justice Cranston said in the Tapping case, Tapping was an entrapment case, but I haven't got time to go into it. He said the authorities, meaning the case authorities, make clear the court must assume the United States government is acting in good faith in the account it has provided. In other words, the British courts trust what the American prosecutor says. You have done something wrong. You have to go back to the US. I'm a British judge. That's fine. Okay, sorry, you're going to be extradited. And you'll say to me, what about the evidence? It's not my job. European arrest warrants, I'm going to have to skip. Yeah? Do you want me to talk about this? Okay. Okay. All right. So, forget the US for the moment, if I've not frightened you enough there. Bear in mind, we are moving towards a series of national licensing schemes, okay, across Europe, yeah? So we have France, Spain, Denmark, Italy, UK. Everyone has got their national licensing scheme, and they're all vying with each other and say, if you're licensed with us, it's legal. If you're outside, it's not. One thing I'll tell you, as being a licensing lawyer, dealing with licensing and regulatory law for 20 years, what happens with a new licensing scheme is the first year or two, it settles down, it beds in, everyone gets licensed up, and that's exactly what happened here in Britain. The next year, they then say, well, who isn't licensed? And then they start the enforcement, and then they start looking at those people, and that's where you've seen an increasing number of prosecutions for gambling activity, illegal gambling activity in Britain. This is what will happen across Europe. European arrest warrant is a powerful weapon. All 27 member states are signatories, and this assumes that if I am extradited from the UK to Bulgaria or Romania, for example, I will get the equal justice that I would get if I was tried in Britain. There is no requirement to prove a prima facie case, which I just talked about, evidence in the US situation. There is also no double criminality test. So if a Bulgarian prosecutor said this is fraud in Bulgaria, it doesn't matter that it doesn't count for fraud in the UK. I could still be extradited. And it covers computer crime. So anyway, the risk is just keep an eye on things. And that's all I want to say, because I don't want to run over too much. So, thank you.